Hello, I'm Emily Reichert, Senior Editor with NAB Amplify. I'm here today with Katie Cole, who is a gaming evangelist and Director of Product Marketing at Perforce. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Emily.
So glad to have you here today.
Nice to join you, too.
So could you tell me a little bit about the company you work for, Perforce?
Sure. So Perforce is a software company that is known for solving the toughest problems in DevOps. And we are most commonly known for our Helix Core product.
So can you tell me a little bit more about Helix Core?
Sure. So Helix Core is a version control software. And version control has been really popular in software development for decades. And about 12 years ago, it became even more popular in game development. And so here we are today at NAB, and you're like, okay, you're in gaming, you're in software development, why are you at NAB, right? Well, a little thing called virtual production has brought game engines, what you might hear referred to as real-time engines, to media and entertainment. All different variety of it. It could be live events, it could be broadcast, it could be the LED volumes that people are shooting on. All of these things have introduced us to version control.
That's very operant. So could you tell me a little bit more about version control? And I think you have some slides, perhaps?
Yes, I do. I do have some slides. So what we've found is when we've come into media and entertainment is that a lot of people are not aware of what is version control software. So I have a few slides here that tell a little bit more about what it does. So my first slide here is just showing kind of what it can look like when you're working with a team and you have these digital assets that are being iterated on and passed around. And this is really common when you're talking about something like virtual production. And you can see here I have 3 users and 2 files. And now there's just a pile of chaos that happens as soon as we start making changes to them, right? I'm emailing to somebody, somebody's emailing to another person. We're getting these files that are corrupted because I've made changes and so has the other person. And so we try using different naming conventions to know this is the final version, or it's final version, right? And it all kind of gets lost in this jumble, and some of these are sent over Slack and some of them are sent over email, and you never know where is the latest version, right? We're looking for the golden version, we're looking for that final version. But when you have something like version control, everybody's working from a central server. All of these files are stored in one location, and then every iteration of that file is stored on top of itself. So now I have the latest version of the file, and I have every version that has ever existed. So if you're working with a team and you figure out like, oh, you know what, we actually really liked that iteration that was three iterations ago, I can click a button and I can get back to that in a second. We're not going to have to redo work. We have access to it right away. So that's what version control is.
That's a game changer for so many different applications. So let's talk a little bit about a real-world example of this in action.
Sure. So version control can be really useful at many different stages in a production. So you have pre-production, which is the most cost-efficient place to be working on iterations of a file. You have production, and inevitably things are going to change when you are on stage or wherever you're shooting. So you're going to have to you're wanting to iterate on that. And then you have post-production. And along each of these phases, you have multiple iterations, multiple different teams working on all of these assets. And that's where we really get into this concept of the case study we're going to talk about today. So I'm here representing the work of one of our customers, ICVR, and they work as virtual production supervisors. They work as virtual production and virtual art departments for different virtual productions. And they worked on season 3 of the Orville. And if you aren't familiar with it, it's a space show, and they were working on some post-VFX graphics for the Orville. Many different scenes, some of them in space, some of them flying. And this was a really challenging project because, first of all, it was post-VFX. And they were using game engines in post-VFX, which is not a very common use for game engines in media and entertainment yet. And with post-VFX, there are always a lot of iterations, right? There's always a lot of opinions. There's a lot of changing, right? It doesn't matter what project you're working on. There's going to be a lot of iterations there. And then on top of that, they had to do color matching because there were physical elements as well as CG elements, and they had to deal with physics because they had a flying spacecraft throughout a world, right? So it was a really challenging project that they had. So they were doing lots and lots of iterations on these assets. But they had Perforce. And so what they ended up doing is they had part of their team in LA, part of their team in Eastern Europe, and then they had the Orville team, who was also in LA. And what they would do is they would work in these like working sessions at somebody's studio, and they would pull their files down from Perforce, and they would iterate on them right there. So the CG supervisor was sitting there in the room with the Orville person. They were making edits on the fly, and the CG supervisor would basically block out generally what they wanted to make changed. At the time that they were signing off for the day, that 24 hours, like we're talking about a 24-hour production cycle here. So the time that they were signing off in LA, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever time it was, those changes were automatically synced to the server, to the Perforce server. And the team in Eastern Europe was just waking up, right? So the team in Eastern Europe had immediate access to those files where all the notes were from their CG supervisor that said, hey, these are the big changes that we want to make to these scenes. And so they would begin working on those assets right away. If you were doing this any other way, you would lose an entire day, right? Because you'd have to wait for those notes to make it to the team, come back, let those finish. By the time that that day ended, they had another revision waiting for them. So it really made it very quick for them to do these iterations. It made it super secure. And again, those teammates in Eastern Europe had immediate access to the files, so they could trade them back and forth. They could leave comments and notes to know this is exactly what we changed. Is this what you're looking for? All within our system and tool.
It sounds both incredibly effective and incredibly cost-effective as well, which are things that these types of budgets are always really tight, as we all know. And
yeah, and it's really hard when you are. Your projects are always involving multiple vendors, right? You want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows that you are working from the latest version of that asset. They want to make sure that you've heard them, right? And they want to make sure that they get their assets as quickly as possible. And now they have this ability to, as that vendor, as ICVR, they can produce those files to their client in a really secure method, but it also works within that system to give them that time to iterate really quickly. So now the ICVR team can give the Orville team access to the server, and they will only give the Orville team access to the server that is their project, right? They could be working on 10 different projects at the same time, doesn't matter. They have such granular permissions that now the Orville team is only seeing their work, and that works vice versa, right? Nobody that's outside the Orville team is going to see the Orville assets.
Were there any interoperability concerns?
No, because it's all about the assets going into Perforce. We don't have to really work with anything else outside. The files just get transferred in and then out, right?
That's perfect. So I also understand you've done a lot of education around the world of virtual production, which is very buzzy. Can you talk about some of that work?
Sure. So again, our partners at ICVR, we have been helping educate everybody on virtual production. So again, there are lots of different applications for virtual production. Most people, when they think about it, they're thinking of the LED volumes, right? But that's not the only application for it. Really, it's any time that there's a real-time element in production, that is virtual production. So we're trying to educate how you can do virtual production in many different ways. Who are the people that are involved? How do they interact with each other? And really, we have a 6-course session right now. We're developing additional courses on it, but it's at least 6 hours of free content that talk about virtual production, how you can be using game engines, how you can be using version control, all for free. So please feel free to sign up, take a look, let us know, give us feedback. We are still actively iterating on this education, so happy for the feedback.
Are there any courses that you would point people to in particular?
I would say that the first course, if you're not very familiar with virtual production, it's a really great intro to just the different ways that virtual production can be used, and just different concepts that are associated with it. So I think that that's a really great intro. And then in addition to this Perforce U course, we do have some additional videos where I sit down with experts that are in the field and go over different aspects of it. So if you're part of the virtual art department, we have a session on that, the different hardware that you use. If you want to actually build an LED stage, what does that look like? So there's a lot of content that's being produced.
It sounds like a really fantastic resource for people who are already in the space or who might be interested in moving in the direction of virtual production.
It's such a great technology and a process. We really want to encourage people to adopt it. And I know it can be really hard when budgets are so tight, timelines are so tight. It's hard to do something new when you know what works before, but there are really so many advantages to it. We want to make sure that people hear how it can be useful for them.
It's absolutely innovative and exciting. So I would also like to know if there are any other Perforce tools that you'd like to take this opportunity to highlight.
Yes. So we also have our new Helix digital asset management, which we refer to as DAM as short. So Helix DAM is our digital asset management tool that's a layer that's added on top of our versioning system. So you already have the system. All the files of those assets are saved there, right? You have every iteration of them. What we've done with Helix DAM is basically created a visual catalog of all of those assets. And again, it could be a 3D model, 2D art, it could be a video clip, an audio clip. We automatically create thumbnails for every version of the file that's been submitted into our system. We do AI tagging, so you're not going to have to rely on other people to manually tag the asset. And now what you have is something that you can search, right? I know that I have had this car in another show of mine, and I want to use it, but maybe I don't want to use the exact same thing, but I know I can use it as a starting point, right? So how can we save time? We can find that car, we can make adjustments, download it, make adjustments to it, upload it back to the system. I can either search visually or I can search by those tags. Another really great thing about this tool is that we allow you to preview the assets in the browser. So at the end of the GIF right now, what we're looking at is we're looking at a 3D model being rendered inside of a browser. So if you've ever shared a 3D model or some sort of file that the other person on the other end doesn't have an application that can open that file and look at it, you know, you get the little error that says, what are you going to open this with? And you're like, I don't know what I'm going to open it with, but I really need to see this file. This is actually going to prevent that from happening, right? I can see it inside of the system itself. So it'll really help with the review process, because not everybody, you know, you're not going to have these artists. The people that are not artists, your producers, your directors, right? They're not going to be using those DCCs, those digital content creation tools, but they can now see it and leave feedback in context.
Another really smart application. Well, thank you, Katie. And if any of you have some additional questions for her, I'm sure she'd be happy to stick around and answer them, or head over to the Perforce booth at 1818.
Yes, and you can also win an Oculus. So if you come and get scanned by me or one of my partners, you can win an Oculus as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.